I can say with some degree of certainty, my childhood ended on September 10th, 1965. In 9 more days, I would be 13, officially a teenager. I am so certain about that date because of the events that unfolded that day. In the early morning, the news of the ongoing damage in South Louisiana created by a Category 4 hurricane named Betsy reached our ears. You see, the flooding from a tidal surge moved across the intercoastal waterway in Lake Pontchartrain in the wee small hours of that morning. And they had inundated our community, which, like all of New Orleans, was below sea level. We would later learn that our house would have 5 feet of water inside the house. The home and its contents, which represented the economic accomplishment of my parents' first 20 years of marriage, was an almost complete loss. This was in a time before FEMA. There was no such thing as flood insurance. Presbyterian disaster assistance didn't even exist. It was a loss, and it was a loss that was repeated over and over again in a community that saw its schools, its courts, its churches, its stores, as well as its homes destroyed. Yet, I have to say, I was one of the lucky ones, sheltered from much of the terror that experience led many to experience and then be haunted by. We did not need to slosh through the rapidly rising waters or be rescued from a rooftop by a neighbor's fishing boat. Due to my father's work responsibilities, my mother, my brother, and I had been ensconced in a downtown hotel on higher ground, along with other employees' families. We did not have to participate in the back-breaking labor of mucking and gutting our home when the waters finally went down. We were also relieved of the soul-sapping work of picking up an item and saying, "Can this be salvaged?" and then shaking our heads and say no. We did not face insecurity about where we would sleep and how we would live. My dad was able to locate a furnished 2-bedroom apartment about 10 miles away, where we would live during the reconstruction of our home from the brick veneer and studs inward. My brother and I would first see the results weeks later, when the detritus of soggy insulation and crumbling sheetrock, broken furniture, and waterlogged and swollen books and papers lined streets of our subdivisions in huge mounds that seemed to stretch for mile after mile. We didn't have to worry about the physical act of rebuilding our home because the contractor who'd built the house just 5 years earlier had quickly been hired to rebuild. Somehow our parents managed to shield us from too much worry. They managed a fine line, a balance of honesty about the physical and financial challenges ahead, while keeping focus on the future, a future with hope. We would begin again, and it would be okay. By November, we were still living in that rented apartment, but much of life was slowly returning to some degree of normalcy. Our school reopened, as did our tiny little Presbyterian church. I can remember the joy of returning as a gathered community for worship as we sat on donated, scuffed, and messy folding chairs that were sitting on a bare concrete floor. We were together. Now, as much as you might think that those events were the most powerful shapers of my life today to come out of that period, the truth of the matter is that those events are overshadowed by a mealtime conversation on a sunny Sunday in November. It was stewardship season. My dad calmly and quietly told us that our family would be raising its pledge. In the aftermath of so much loss, in the anticipation of mounting expenses ahead, he said these words that reflected his core belief. We are raising our pledge because the need is so great. We are raising our pledge in gratitude because God has been so good. We are raising our pledge because we didn't lose anything that can't be replaced. We are raising our pledge because the losses were just stuff. Looking back through all these intervening years, that quiet conversation was one of the most significant I heard from my father. It impacts me to this day. God is so good. The needs of others is so great. Stuff, as much as I like it, is just stuff. We can rebuild. We are blessed to be a blessing. I think that's a pretty fine roadmap for navigating the ups and downs of life. Is it not?